All right, so self-identity. Self-identity is the way that we perceive ourselves. So a lot of times we'll allow others to dictate, like other people might have their own view of our identity, but self-identity is the way that we perceive ourselves. And a lot of times this is labels that we've taken on, sometimes labels that we've chosen, labels that we feel we have to fulfill. And so a lot of times there's a value system associated with our identities. The way that we define our self-worth is by how well we fulfill these aspects of ourselves. So just to clarify a little bit further, some of the things that I used to associate with my identity were things like mother and wife. And so my intention was to fill this persona of a good mother or a good wife or a good daughter, a good granddaughter, all of these other things that we take on. This could be a good student, a good coach, whatever your job title is. We take that identifier and we bring it on as part of our identity, even though who we are goes beyond these labels and identifiers and attachments, let's call them. So a lot of times the system of value is supported by self-depreciation and reinforced by setting impossible standards, self-judgment, and self-sabotage. So we will choose an identifier to associate with ourselves. And then when we set these standards of fulfilling this, we set ourselves up for failure. Because when I take on the label of good mother, what does that mean? It's going to mean something different to every person, but I had it in my mind that this was determined by how well the outward appearance was to other people, if that makes sense. So my identifier of good mother was associated with always having a clean house, making homemade meals almost every night, having obedient children out in public, all of these impossible standards that we take on from society's viewpoint or our family's viewpoints. And then we begin to associate with them, oh, well, I have to be this or I'm not worthy. So I had this idea, I had to fulfill this persona of a good mom in order to be worthy of love, of the title, of anything. And so when I began to unravel that and kind of sit with that, I realized I didn't actually think that is what defined a good mother. I would not look at one of my friends and say, oh, your house is dirty, you're not a good mom. That was crazy to me, but I had these expectations of myself. So I set really high expectations. I told myself if I didn't meet these impossible expectations, I was not worthy. And then I would either just self-depreciate myself, talk down to myself, beat myself up, or I would self-sabotage. Because, oh, well, if I'm not worthy of this, well, then I might as well just give up. And so I would subconsciously set myself up in the cycle of trying to achieve and failing, or self-sabotaging, so I didn't even have to try. If you have any questions that come up, or if anything within my wording doesn't quite make sense, you can comment and I'll try to answer as I go through, but I will definitely answer anything at the end. So I wanted to take a moment to ask you what some of your self-identifiers are. As I'm speaking, if any have popped up, come to mind, you can type them in the comments. And if you're watching the replay, this is your first question for the homework. So list some of your key identifiers. This could be the breadwinner of the house, the provider of the house. This could be a loyal friend. This could be constantly available everyone else's support system. These identifiers are usually associated with roles we fill within our lives, and a lot of times they have to do with other people. So either if you're going to a job, if you're serving people within your job, or if you're caretaking in any way. So those are some of the identifiers that might come up. When we attach to these identifiers, we're limiting ourselves from experiencing anything outside of this label. So when I was attached to this one notion of what a good mother was, I was not allowing myself to experience some of the joys and just like small moments within motherhood, because I was so set on achieving these impossible standards that I didn't slow down to play with my child. I didn't stop to nurture myself or give myself rest. I didn't stop to appreciate all of the wonderful things that I did accomplish. I was only focused on what I didn't. I wasn't the good mom because I ordered in dinner that night, or whatever the story was that I was telling myself. And it limited me from experiencing my true reality, my true self. The soul exists without limitations. When we are in spirit form, we don't have these limitations of the subconscious belief systems of the physical body, of the physical world, things that we want, we believe we can have, we know we can have, and they come to us. So when we incarnate into this body, we take on the limitations of being a human being, which means that we now have a subconscious, we have an ego, we have the density and the polarity of earth that we need to navigate, but we always still have access to this limitless part of ourselves. This is the higher self. And so we can always tap in and access this energy that is us, even though we are in the physical form. So our higher self exists in spirit form, but it is also part of us. And we can pull in more of our higher selves, and we can work with our higher selves in order to manifest or to see things from a different perspective, to get that higher viewpoint. And that, I think, is really exciting, because we're not limited by what the ego sees. We can tune into our own selves and get the viewpoint of our true energy, our true self, which is the higher self. And so when we're doing some of this homework and you're asking yourself some of these questions, just remember to tune in and be connected with your own energy instead of the logical or mental aspects of yourself, because the higher self has a lot of perspective that they can share with you through your journaling. So even if you don't have practice tuning into this energy, it's still within you at all times. So this is something that triggers your intuition, and it triggers your just the way that you navigate within the world. Where was I? Oh, yes. Okay, so much of our identity is taken on from what we're told we're supposed to be. So either from our parents, from society, or even from the media. So we will take on the identity of either what we saw reflected to us. So if we saw our parents fulfilling a certain role and taking on certain beliefs, a lot of times we'll take those on for ourselves as well. Another way that we might have taken on some of these identities and beliefs around worth is to almost like the shadow side. So we see our parents failing in some way, and so we determine we're not going to be that way. We don't want to show up that way, and so we are dead set on showing up in a different way. And this doesn't leave much room for compassion or for just the mistakes that come with being a human. So media is one of the big ones that we see today because media is everywhere. I know, especially for my children, I have to be careful with, for one, how much they're watching, and then also what they're watching, because my daughter takes on these subtle energies and hints throughout the show or the program, whatever it is, and then she will take them on as truth for her own identity. And I saw this happening with her at a very young age, and now that she is 6, she is starting to configure her own identity instead of existing as, oh, I'm a child and I'm figuring out and navigating the world. Now she is moving into this older age, and she is starting to choose her identifiers. And so she's going through the phases of, replicating what she sees in the media. She's replicating what she sees within her home, and she's just trying on different things to see what fits. And I think that is, it's a very normal thing for humans to do. We try things on, we take things on, and we see what fits. But as we get older, we take them on and we forget to ask, does this fit? Is this right? And so then we're just boxing ourselves in. So stopping to question, that's what we're doing today. We're going to stop and question our identity, and if it's aligned with our truth, if this is fitting with our expansion, our desires, where we're going next. Did the identification of a good mom within all of the structures and the paradigms that I had placed on that title, did that serve me in my expansion? Definitely not. I had to shed my beliefs around this so that I could show up in my business, show up in my relationships, and to really get to know who I was without all of the pressure and expectation. So our perception of what's acceptable influences our perception of self. If we are told constantly by our parents that this kind of behavior is unacceptable, we will grow up to believe that's true. So if we're told over and over and over again a messy house is unacceptable or a messy room is unacceptable, this is going to lead us to either completely rebelling and being messy, or we're going to swing the other way and be really obsessively tidy. And I've seen within myself where this has happened both ways, not necessarily around tidiness, but other aspects of my identity. So I will swing on the pendulum. So if I identified as the good girl in high school, when I started to unravel what that really meant, and I didn't want to identify that way anymore, I felt that was limiting, I swung the other way and realized, oh, well, that doesn't fit either, so where do I fall? And that's when we have to really question, what is our truth? What aligns with us? What feels good? What feels right? Because the beliefs and expectations of others can't dictate our own worth, our own happiness, our own purpose in life. So all of those expectations ultimately hold us back. So what does self-identity have to do with self-worth? We often tell ourselves the story of, I'll be worthy when. So we set ourselves up with these expectations, and we're setting ourselves up not to succeed. It is a form of self-sabotage. So subconsciously, we apply this to the fulfillment of our identity as well. Identities that we picked up that were either reflected to us or they were in response to avoiding an undesired characteristic. So we'll say, I'll be worthy when I'm a good mom. I'll be worthy when I get all the chores done. I'll be worthy when ... Or we even will say, I'll never be worthy if I can't get this right. So if we've attached ourselves to the label of somebody who consistently keeps a clean house, I'll never be worthy if I can't keep my house clean. And this is the story that we tell ourselves, because we don't believe that we'll live up to the expectations that we've set for ourselves, the identifier that we've chosen to identify with. We've taken on the external labels and projections as who we are instead of asking who we truly are and living from that place. Does that make sense? So all the while we're telling ourselves these stories of what makes us worthy and what makes us not worthy, we're missing out on enjoying our own strengths and our own energy, our own truths. Each label we identify with typically comes with a list of requirements, like I talked about with what I consider to be a good mom. So when you are asking yourself, what are your identifications? What labels have you associated with as your truth? Ask yourself, what does that ultimately mean? Like, what does that break down into? So if I am a loyal friend, does that mean that when my friend is doing something out of integrity, I don't speak up? I don't say anything? That's really heavy. I don't want to live with that. So we have to ask ourselves these questions, because in order to live in alignment with our truth, in order to live in alignment with integrity, we have to recognize that sometimes our identity isn't made up of labels, but it's made up of choices. And so then we only have to make the choices that serve us right now in the moment. Does this feel good to me right now? Some days it might feel really good to get all of the dishes done and the kitchen entirely clean. Other days it might feel really good to sit back and watch a movie or play with my kids. So we have to understand that our identity can shift and change, and it doesn't dictate our worth. And that is the ultimate goal. So when we begin to see ourselves beyond the labels, we can appreciate our truths. As we begin to accept and embody these truths, we can create a life from a state of alignment and flow rather than force or conformity. So I did want to insert a disclaimer here. If your chosen labels have come from a place of consideration and they feel really empowering, then that is awesome and more power to you. I think that when we choose our labels as a way to help us show our true selves in the world, that can be really empowering. And they're not taking away from our authentic expression, but they're just solidifying that. But I do want to encourage you to be open to the idea that these identities can shift over time. So just because this identity or label was your truth at one time doesn't mean it has to always be your truth if it comes out of alignment. Because labels themselves, they're not bad. The goal of this little workshop is to help you to see your true self beyond the labels that were kind of forced upon us, or some of the things that we've grown up with. The things we're told to adhere to in order to be deemed worthy by society. So during this workshop, we're coming to meet our true selves and claiming the authority of our own worth rather than giving the authority to an outside source to determine our own worthiness. Because ultimately, no one else can define your self-worth. Only you can define your self-worth. Which brings me to my final little section, which is our perception of worth. According to spirit, source, or God, however you choose to label that energy, our worth is static, which means it never changes. We are always consistently worthy, no matter of our external circumstances, no matter of our actions, no matter if we did the dishes or watched a movie. We are always worthy. And we always have the option to claim that worth. But our perception of worth shifts and changes. So our worth is here. It never changes. We incarnated, and God said, you are worthy forever and ever. and that never changes. But we believe that as humans, with our ego mind and our subconscious mind and all the beliefs and labels that we've taken on from society, that sometimes I'm worthy and sometimes I'm not, and other times I don't know. And so our perception of our own worth can shift and change depending on what our beliefs and attachments are. So, your perception of your worth can be influenced by self-judgment or the opinions of others. Self-judgment is the opposite of self-compassion. And a lot of times we judge ourselves as a way to step in front of other people's judgment. So we come at ourselves with judgment because we are afraid of what somebody else might think. For a lot of my life, it was my grandmother. So I would show up in a certain way and I would judge myself really harshly to fit into this box, because if I didn't, so-and-so would think that I wasn't worthy and they wouldn't love me anymore. And then my identity falls apart. And who am I? What am I doing? So self-judgment can really get in the way of the way that we show up, of our expression of our truth. Because, yeah, a lot of things. But basically, coming to a place of self-compassion and understanding that you don't have to be perfect to be worthy. You don't have to fulfill these roles in a certain way to be worthy or to be loved or to be accepted. You have the ability to claim your own worth, to love yourself, and get validation all from yourself. Dorshane says, I love this lesson. Thank you for showing us we are the creator of our experience, whether or not we're aware of it. Yes, exactly. So our perception can also be influenced by the opinions of others. So while I was talking about self-judgment often being a reaction of fear of judgment of others, the same goes for the opinions of others. So we can influence our own perception of self-worth based on the opinions of others. If someone I love and care about and I value their opinion tells me, oh, well, you shouldn't do that because a good mom wouldn't do that, that's going to shift if I do not hold the belief of self-worth, that will influence my perception. So that doesn't mean it has to, but it can. When you are aligned with your own truth, when you have set beliefs around your own self-worth and your validation comes from your own beliefs, the opinions and judgments of others will influence you less. Because when you decide you're going to play with your kids that week because they're having a hard time and you want to play with your kids this week, the house falls a little bit behind, there's some dirty dishes in the sink, and so comes over and says, oh, that's really gross. My mom was a great mom, and she would have never let that happen. You're not a good mom. That is not going to shake my own identity of self-worth when I've already done the work around that. So hopefully that makes sense. So as you're sitting with these aspects, observe some of the things that you might have allowed to influence your view of your own worth. That way you can come to a place of understanding the energy behind it, why that maybe came up with you. A lot of times these will be sore spots. So other things that might influence your view of your worth might be parents, your boss, your friends, your partner, sometimes maybe even your children. These are the people that are typically close to you. You value their opinion. Other things that might influence your view of self-worth is television, the media. They set a certain standard that is very often unachievable, and they create this narrative that anything less than perfect isn't worthy. And I know that we've come a long way within society, and a lot of these things have shifted and changes, but that narrative is still present. So recognizing how media has affected your view of your own self-worth, how your loved ones have affected your view of your self-worth, um, recognizing how strangers have affected your own view of self-worth. Do you value the opinion of strangers over the opinion of yourself? Um, so our identity will shift and change over time, but we will always be worthy. I think especially when we're doing some of the deep inner work that we do within the spiritual community, some of this personal development and uncovering our own truths, um, a lot of these things shift and change. We might not, once upon a time in my life, I identified as Christian. I worked very hard to be a good Christian, and I always fell short. So over time, as I began to dig in deeper into what that meant, what being a good Christian was, what my connection to God was, my identity as a Christian fell away. I was able to access a truer connection to God through this questioning of my identity. And I think that is a really powerful tool that sometimes we overlook, that our connection to ourselves, our connection to spirit, can be influenced by our own identity. If we're allowing our identity to keep us inside the box, rather than allowing it to expand, basically. So anytime that you claim unworthy, you take on the label of unworthy, you are separating from your truth, because ultimately your truth is always worthy. You are always connected to the divine. You are always a part of spirit. When you incarnated on earth, you are a reflection of source. You have this source energy within you, or I think I've heard it referred to as a spark. So you're a little spark of source energy. We're all part of the whole, but we allow these limitations to block us from our connection to ourselves, to the divine, to other people in our life. So my purpose in bringing some of this to the forefront is to encourage you to question and unravel some of the things that you might have allowed to step in the way of your own connection. That way you can meet your truth. That way you can claim the areas where you are worthy, and ultimately so that you can become stronger, more resilient within yourself, and opening up that bridge to the divine so that you can step forth and fulfill your purpose and all of the amazing things that come with recognizing your true identity. So I guess the last little bit that I wanted to talk about is the truth of your identity. This is not something that is going to come from the external world. A lot of the times, these are things that you might have experienced as a child and then were maybe shamed out of you, or you felt guilty for expressing them. A lot of the times, these might be things like loud, creative, messy, adventurous, some of the things that I think especially when it comes to gender, there's a lot of societal norms that might dictate the way that we show up. So if we're really boisterous and rowdy and we like to roughhouse as a girl, these things might be shamed out of us so that we then behave in the proper way that a girl would behave. So these are some of the things that I saw in my childhood. But recognizing that your truth doesn't come from these outside sources, it ultimately comes from within. Like I was talking about my daughter and the way that she has tried things on for size and she's putting together her own identity. Sometimes we do see things reflected in our external that feel good, and so we take them on. That's not what I mean. Things that we feel forced to take on are not our true identity. So sitting with yourself and asking yourself, who am I really? What is my truth? What identity do I want to show up as? Because as you start to unravel and as you start to question, it opens up the connection for you, for self-connection, this connection to your truth. And ultimately, anything that is not your truth is just a limitation. So that is my hope for you. So I have a couple of journaling prompts. I think I can pin them in the comments. I will definitely comment with the homework. That way you guys can refer back to it if you need to. But let me see here. The first question is, list out some of your key identifiers. The second question is, without judgment, observe some of the things that you've allowed to influence your view of your own worth. And thirdly, how do you define your worth? And how is it linked to your identity? Fourth question, who am I? This might be a short list, this might be a long list, but as you're writing, after you write them all down, go back over them, and if it resonates, circle it. Who am I? I am creative. That resonates. I'm going to circle it. And if it doesn't resonate, cross it out. We don't want it on our list. Who am I? I am, oh goodness, I can't think of one right now. But I am quiet. I am shy. I keep my mouth shut. No way. Maybe once upon a time, but I don't identify that way anymore. So double checking your list. And then the last question is, how would you treat yourself if you believed you were worthy?